Hello everyone, we'll be starting in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you can see my screen and you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. A warm welcome to the Product Leadership Festival Design Edition hosted by the Institute of Product Leadership. Some of you may have already attended the product and data editions of our festival in April and May. I'm very happy to welcome you all to the design edition. We have made it available to the public, 30 plus amazing knowledge sharing sessions from the previous festivals. Please check it out. You can follow this URL that you see on the screen. Before we start today's session, let me give you a quick brief about what we do. The Institute is a global B school for technology and product innovators. We have partnered with 3 universities in India and the University of Houston in the United States. Founded in 2012, Institute has built and developed a community of product leaders, and now, of course, we are into design and data leadership as well. Now, today is the third day of the festival. Hope you enjoyed the last 2 days. As you can see on the screen, we have put together a great lineup for you tonight. We start the session at 8 p.m. with Gaurav Mathur of Myntra, and then we move on to Arjun Vora of Uber and Mary Yang, Director of Product, LinkedIn. Each session is going to be of 45 minutes, including the Q&A. Please stay with us throughout the session. There won't be much of a gap between the two sessions. And here is something very exciting. On the 13th of June, we have an open conference day. Many aspiring speakers have nominated themselves for the open conference day, as you can see here. So if you have a favorite speaker or a favorite topic, please go ahead and vote for them. You can find the URL to vote and check out on your chat window, or alternatively scan the QR code. This is on the 13th June. We don't have much time left, so please vote. And if the speaker that you voted for wins, you will win a prize too. Is that exciting? Now, you can have a one-on-one mentoring session with our festival speakers by referring your colleagues and friends and hence climbing up the leadership board. So for that, please scan this QR code and climb up the leadership board, or alternatively, you can find the URL to do this on your chat window also. Any questions after the keynote speaker is done? Any questions that you may want to ask, please ask in the specific LinkedIn thread dedicated for this particular session. The first session is Gaurav's. And please scan this QR code and keep it ready so that whenever you have a question arising in your mind, you can go ahead and ask your question. Whatever questions you ask on the on this LinkedIn thread will be picked up and will be shared with the speaker. So please go ahead and you can see the same on your chat window. Allow me to introduce Smita, who's the moderator for the first session. Smita is a business analyst with MGM Technology Partners. Smita, we are very happy to have you with us. Welcome to this session. Handing this over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I will switch on the video. So, good evening. Metrics is not the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the design, right? So, do we ever measure design? It seems very subjective. But today, we have Gaurav Mathur with us to give a few perspective to this. Gaurav is a design leader and currently heads product design at Myntra. He helps build products that people love. In the past, he has designed SaaS products at Citrix. He co-founded Tribu Innovations, a design-led consultancy based in Mumbai and Singapore. He started his career working for Media Lab Asia that was set up in collaboration with MIT Media Lab. Gaurav is passionate about all aspects of design, from graphic, interaction, product design to architecture. It's my pleasure to introduce you, Gaurav. But before we proceed, to just get to know our audience and get into the use of design metrics, there is an interesting poll coming up. So I request all of you guys to take it up and help us understand what you think of the design metrics. So here's the question. Which of the following best describes your perception of design metrics? Perfect. Very interesting results coming up. Perfect. Okay, so very interesting, and we will check as we go on with the presentation together with Gaurav Mathur if they are true, false. How do these can they be so well classified? Is it so black and white, or is it gray? We will get to know. So let's go on to another question that is coming up to know you better. Okay. What best describes me? Okay, perfect. I thank you everyone for those interesting results and your inputs. As I said, let's check these perceptions as we go. So Gaurav, the stage is all yours.
Smita, thank you for the introduction and the kind words. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Smita, thank you for conducting that poll. I think it was a very interesting question that you had as the first one. And it was also good to see the kind of mixed response that the audience had. Also good to know that we have product managers, business analysts, designers in the audience today. So let me just get started. We'll cover some interesting things in this discussion. As Smita mentioned, the topic that I'll be covering today is how do we measure design, and some metrics that we can use to measure design. Let me just get started straight away. I still see the poll up on that. I believe we've closed that. So, as Smita mentioned, I've designed experiences over the course of my career for SaaS products, for enterprise products, and consumer-facing e-commerce applications as well. Some of the work that I've done has been on improving existing products. Some of it has been on innovating and creating new products. Some of the applications and products have had users across the globe, and some of them have been focused on the enormous Indian market. And these products have also been across platforms. So more recently, with the e-commerce platform is heavily dominated with mobile apps, mWeb, website. In the past, I've also done some worked on some desktop applications. And today I'll be sharing insights that I've learned over the years by working on these products, and how experience could be measured for different kinds of scenarios, for different kinds of products, right? Over this talk, I'll be using certain terms interchangeably. So if I say users and you in your context, think of it as customers, just feel free to change that as I go. Or you could be working on a product that actually doesn't have paying customers, and I think their users would just hold good. Yeah. So as Smita said, can design truly be measured, right? This question keeps coming up whenever I discuss this topic with designers or other folks, because there is a lot of subjectivity in design, right? So can we truly measure design? and what aspects of design, right? So I want to address this upfront. And the way, at least I think of design, is in two parts. So there is subjectivity in the design craft, in the way we create things. So there are certain aspects of design which are very visual in nature. They are visceral in nature. And you see something and you like it or you dislike it, right? Certain products evoke certain feelings in you, and sometimes there is an emotional connect as well with products, right? And these tend to be extremely hard to measure, these kinds of qualities of design. Whereas there are other aspects of design, right? uh, which For example, design is all about problem solving, and there is a lot of objectivity that goes into problem solving. Can we measure some of these aspects that we have in design, right? um, and it's also about problem solving in an effective manner. I think Smita, one of the options that Smita had in the poll was about design being like art and it just cannot be measured, right? I believe design is very unlike art. There are certain aspects that we derive from art, that we use in the aesthetics of the design. But I think design is all about problem solving. It's not about what I feel like doing and I'll continue to do. I don't care about the user or the business, right? Design serves the users, and we can actually measure how well the problem has been solved. Um, and I think this goes across all fields of design, right? It's just much easier to do this in the digital product design world that we are in today. But you could also, for example, measure certain aspects of industrial design. You could measure how much material has been used, how stable the form is, right? I studied architecture a long time ago, and even in architecture, there are certain aspects that can be measured fairly easily. For example, what's the area utilization, right? What's the circulation space for this building versus the usable space? What's the energy consumption, sustainability aspects of the building, right? How much parking does it cater to? And then there are certain aspects that are very hard to measure, right? When it comes to the aesthetics, the form of the building, the spatial quality, right? The spaces that get created when a building is created, those tend to be very hard to quantify. You can have an opinion on them, but it's very hard to put that on a scale. And let's say I was an architect and I was designing a building and I wanted to speak with the occupants or the visitors of that building. I would probably have to wait for like 5 to 10 years for that to be constructed, and then people occupying it, people actually starting to live and breathe in that space, to be able to get some feedback. But that's not the case with digital product design, right? So that brings me to the next thing, which is all about user-centric design. And I think I saw a mixed audience here, a lot of product designers, a lot of product managers. And I don't have to really explain this term, right? We always design keeping the user needs at the center, right? So it's all about problem solving for the users. Even when we are solving problems for business, we want to keep the user at the center of it. We want to make sure that we deliver an excellent experience to our users, and our users find value in the product, right? They continue to use the product, and we obviously want to build habit forming products, right? At the end of the day, every company strives to do that. And therefore, what happens is that data informed UX design becomes very critical. um, and I'm using this term very specifically, data informed, not data driven. um, and when we talk about data, there are various forms of data, right? There is qualitative data that a lot of designers are generally familiar with, or researchers are very familiar with this format of data. And then there are certain quantitative aspects as well, right? And the reason we want to measure is because we want to benchmark our products. First of all, benchmark and then figure out where we want to go from here. Uh, which parts do we want to improve further? Which parts do we want to tweak? Bring more user attention there, right? And the constant journey is all about, how do we improve the experience through experimentation. So we create certain hypotheses, we test them, and in the process we learn about the behavior of our users. Um, The other point, that comes with UX design is that today the cost of making changes and cost of improvement in a product in the digital product world is comparatively lower than some of the other fields of design. Right? I spoke about architecture earlier, and imagine what would it cost to make significant changes to a building, right? But we constantly discuss how certain products, digital products, have been now redesigned, completely redesigned, right? And leave alone like smaller changes that go on in a digital product, right? A lot of users don't even recall these changes. And we'll discuss about experimentation later in the talk. Now let me shift gears and show some realistic problems that we all encounter when we work with with a lot of stakeholders and look at business overall, right? So let's say you're a product manager or a designer working on a SaaS productivity tool, right? And you would probably you would have encountered this kind of a scenario where you want to grow the active users by X% over the next quarter. Or you could be working on a food delivery app and you want to redesign your checkout flow and reduce drop-offs. Or you could be working on a music streaming service and you want to get more people to listen to songs on your product, right? These are all goals that we kind of relate to. But how do we go about achieving these, right? How do we break down these kind of problems into smaller projects? And how do we measure our progress on these kind of projects, right? Especially the experience part of it. Now, the way I think of product matrix is broadly in these categories, right? And this list is not exhaustive by any means. Some people might group it under different heads, but at least I think of experience matrix in this fashion. So the first set is about loyalty and satisfaction, and generally things like net promoter score, customer satisfaction scores, etc., fall in this bucket. The next one is all about usability metrics. So these are things that we measure when we conduct usability tests. Things like task success, task completion time, system usability score. Right? The next bucket is all about how many users are currently using your product, right? And what's the churn like? How many people stop using your product over a period of time? How many people are you able to retain? What's the growth like? The next bucket is more around behavioral metrics. And this is about how frequently do people use your product, right? What's the engagement? What's the adoption for features? What's the repeat usage like? How do people navigate in your product, right? Do they land on this page and where do they go next? The last bucket I feel is, I think most people here would know of this, it's conversion, like simple click-through rates, and drop-offs, the funnels that we all are very familiar with. Yeah. Now I'll quickly jump into each of these buckets and cover a few, not in detail, but at least give you a flavor of what lies in these. The first one is about loyalty and satisfaction. And net promoter score is a very well-known and also highly debated metric that a lot of companies use. And this actually measures loyalty on an 11-point scale, right? It's a very simple question that is asked to users. This is also, most of these loyalty satisfaction metrics are self-reported metrics. So users themselves tell you, right? You conduct a survey and they tell you what they feel like. So the question is, how likely are you to recommend product X to your family or friends? And you can replace this X with your product name or service name. People who rate this survey with a 9 or a 10 are promoters, and everyone who rates between 0 to 6 is a detractor. And 7 to 8 are kind of passives. They are indifferent to the experience, right? And the way to calculate is you deduct detractors from the percentage promoters and you get an NPS score. So theoretically, your NPS score could lie anywhere between -100 to +100. And an average score is considered to be like a 20. A good score is anywhere between 60. Good, like really loyal brands have scores above 70. Now you could argue that, hey, this doesn't tell us anything about experience. This is all about loyalty. But there have been a lot of studies that actually relate loyalty to the experience that is delivered. It's unlikely that you would recommend a service or a product to someone if you've not had a good experience with it, right? And this survey, the NPS survey, generally also has another question, which is an open text field, right? And users are actually nudged to enter any feedback that they might have in that field. And I think that's also a huge goldmine for designers to look at and derive insights from. It's not just the NPS score that we need to look at and worry about. Right. Similarly, there is a customer satisfaction score, very similar kind of a question. This is measured on a 5-point Likert scale. A 5-point Likert scale is very often used in surveys, and it's again a very simple formula to calculate your customer satisfaction score. There is another similar score that is called the customer effort score, and the question there is how easy was it to deal with our company today? And again, a 5-point Likert scale, extremely difficult to extremely easy. And again, you can figure out what kind of challenges customers are facing with your product or service. The next one actually is, I think a lot of people are familiar with. We use this every day, right? When we download a new product, which is app and Play Store ratings. Now, again, I think what's very critical here is not just to look at the rating, but the reviews that come, right? The detailed feedback that people give on the Play Store and App Store. There is also a Microsoft store. There is also an Apple Mac store. And each of these have a very similar kind of a pattern, right? You can look at a product rating, you can look at reviews. Again, a lot of data can be derived out of this. I'll move on to the next bucket. This is all about usability metrics, how usable or easy to understand your product is. And the first one, usability generally be related to qualitative data, because that's what we gather in a usability research. But there is also a lot of quantitative data that can come out of a usability study. I'll show you some examples. So, for example, the really simple one is task success. Right? You could measure how many people were able to complete a task successfully, right? And you could just do a binary rating for these, right? A 1 and a 0. So, for example, in this usability test, 5 tasks were tested and 6 across 6 users. And as you can see, task 3 needs a lot, could need a lot of improvement, right? So the score is not very high, the task completion rate, whereas task 5 seems to be fairly easy to understand and grasp, and most users were able to complete that. I think what's again important here is not just looking at the task success rate, but also looking at where are people stumbling, right? Where are they encountering errors? Where are things not clear to them? And then work on them. Similarly, there is a task completion time. Again, very simple to understand, right? You measure how much time it takes to complete a task. I think for a lot of B2B products, a lot of products that need repetitive tasks, this is a very critical metric to look at and measure. Generally, a lower task completion time is better for functional tasks, but you could also have products where you want the time to be longer, right? For example, games fall in this bucket. You want people to spend more time playing that game, right? So I think context becomes very critical, and what you're measuring also becomes a factor of that. The next one is system usability scale. This is actually a survey that's done after the usability test is complete. So you've walked the user through a set of tasks, they've performed them, and now you give this survey to them. It has 10 questions, and each of them has a 5 is the user needs to rate on a 5-point Likert scale again, strongly disagree to strongly agree. The way it's structured is that the odd number questions here are actually in a positive format, whereas the even ones are in a negative format, right? And there is a formula to calculate it. So this measures actually 2 things. It measures the usability of the product as well as learnability of the product, because there are some questions that focus essentially on learnability. How easy was it to figure out? And generally, a score of anything less than 50 is not acceptable on this. 68 is considered to be a very average score. So anything above 70 is actually what you should strive for in a system usability scale. I'll move on to user metrics. This is like the next bucket that we have. How many users use the product, right? And I think this becomes very critical for consumer-facing products, where users, you want to acquire users, you want to look at how many users are currently using the product, and how is that base shifting or changing, right? Now, the the first metric to look at is essentially churn, right? Um, and this is essentially what percentage of users have stopped using your product in a given period of time. Churn is generally measured like on a weekly basis, generally on a monthly, quarterly basis, annual basis, etc. And actually, the simplest formula for churn is really simple. You just look at how many people have stopped using your product and divide it by the number of users you had at the beginning of this period, right? And then do like multiply it by 100 to get the churn percentage. But what makes it complex is that you're also constantly acquiring new users, right? So even if you're looking at a month, you've probably added like 500 new users on your product, and out of those 500, maybe 100 have also left. And let's say you had a base of 10,000 to begin with. Now, out of that 10,000, also some thousand have left, right? And then how do you calculate it? So that's where the complexity in the calculation comes. There are different ways of calculating it. Will not get into the details of it, but it's important to know how many people are currently leaving or stop using your platform. Right? Retention is just the opposite of churn. So retention measures how many people continue to routinely use your product in a given period, right? So both are important to measure, and you could have different strategies to increase or decrease both. Right. Here's an interesting metric, right? So this is actually a little dated data. This is from second half of 2018. And I'll just read out the statement. This is the average 3-month user retention rate of mobile apps worldwide stood at 29% with a 71% churn rate. What this means is that in a period of 3 months, most of the mobile apps that are out there in the world, they saw an average retention of only 30%, 29%, right? So 70% of the users left or stopped using that product in a 3-month period, right? And this is actually something to be concerned about if you're creating a mobile app, right? How do you retain users over a long period of time? What kind of things do you do in your design and experience that brings them back? Right. The next set is around behavioral metrics, and this is about how and how often do users use your product. I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with like active users, sessions, right? So active users are measured on like a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I've just put a DAU there, but DAU stands for daily active users. You could have MAU, which is monthly active users. Similarly, you could measure sessions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, or sessions per user. And a lot of companies, especially those in the social media kind of platforms, right? They measure engagement with DAU over MAU kind of a metric. So this is about frequency of usage. I don't think this applies to all kinds of products, but it definitely applies to products where you want to create a lot of engagement. You want more people coming in and more frequently. Right. So the other ways of measuring engagement could be just looking at content consumption, right? So how much content is being consumed by a user, or which specific features are being used by that user. For example, share usage, right? Or tapping on a media that's embedded in a content, or visits to a profile, or likes, etc., right? Or following someone else, inviting other users, right? All of these kind of indicate how engaged your user base is with your product. Similarly, there are like page views, time spent. You can get total page views, views per user, page views per session, time spent by user, right? So average session duration, etc. All kind of indicate what kind of engagement you have. Right. The next bucket that we have is conversion, and right. This is again, I think this probably is the most easiest to understand, and probably most of the people here would be familiar with this, which is what do users click on, where do they drop off, right? And click-through rate is like the simplest metric to measure this, which is how often is a button or a link clicked. If you're in the world of ads, CTRs is like the key metric there, right? There are other metrics as well. We've covered page views, content consumed, errors, etc. Right? Drop-offs is another critical one, where you look at like a funnel view of where people are dropping off. This is I don't know which product this belongs to. This is from Wikipedia, and this shows like a standard funnel that you have where from the homepage the users are navigating to a sign up page, and just between these two there is like a 89% drop off, and then the sign up is like a 2-3 step process, right? And between the first page of sign up and the second page of sign up there is again a 41% drop off, right? This indicates to users that a lot can be done to improve these two areas specifically. We could look at how do we increase the visibility of this whole flow, right at the beginning, right at the top of the funnel. And we could also look at how do we increase the first step itself, right? How do we make that easier to use so that more people proceed to the second step and eventually complete the funnel. Funnels generally, as the name suggests, generally go like this. You definitely see drop-offs at every level. So in this case, the total conversion is just 6% from the total number of users who start this process. Right. So I think we've looked at like most of the buckets, and the idea was to just give you a flavor of what these are and what you could look at to measure experience. Right. There are also interesting links between these. So, for example, if you're looking at engagement, right, you could also see that there is a link between retention and loyalty and engagement, for example, right? The more loyal your customer base is, the more people you'll be able to retain, and if you do the right things, you'll also be able to engage them, right? Now, at the beginning of this discussion, we said that there are certain things that cannot be measured in design, right? And a lot of people in the poll also suggested that it's pretty hard to measure certain things in design, right? It could probably in some ways be like art. So what are those kind of things, right? What do they translate into? I think some of them are the things that you do for making the experience delightful. So these are, for example, these could be micro interactions that you have in your product. Some of the micro interactions actually help relate users to certain elements on your page or in your flow, and some actually also help learnability. But some could be just smoother transitions from one screen to the other that just add pure delight into the experience, right? Typography, the use of white space, tone of language, some of these become slightly harder to measure, but they do reflect in certain metrics. So if you observe closely, if you make changes to these, and for example, certain SUS score might go up, you would see better results on your usability metrics, on the behavior metrics, on engagement, etc. But the delta generally tends to be fairly small with these kind of changes, and they become very hard to quantify. Let me move on to another aspect that we touched upon fairly early on, which is experimentation, right? So I think the way to look at things is that it's important to experiment and have a experimentation framework while you're designing and creating experiences, so that you can constantly make changes and measure where you're going with these changes. Each experiment should actually inform you something about the users, right? It should bring some insights to you about your user base and how are they reacting to the changes you've made in the product. How are they navigating now with the changes? What do they like? What do they not like? Are you seeing more drop-offs or lesser drop-offs now? right? And A/B testing is a great way to measure some of these and also to test a hypothesis. Right? You need to start with an hypothesis and figure out which option works better. I'll give you one example, and let's go back to some of the goals that we looked at, early on. So some of the business goals that we looked at were, let's take the first one, which is SaaS productivity tool, and let's say the business goal was, hey, let's grow active users by X% over the next quarter, right? Um, Now, this could be a simple SaaS productivity tool that you have. How would you go about breaking this task, right? I think this seems like a very noble thought. Let's grow our user base. Let's grow active users. How do you go about solving this kind of a problem? How do you break it down into smaller chunks? So you could say that, let's build certain hypotheses around this. And one of the hypotheses could be, let's reduce churn, right? If we reduce churn, we'll have more users, and then we can engage them, make them more active, right? And you could say that this we could do through a improved sign-up flow that we have, and through an onboarding experience that we'll create, right? So you could draft your hypothesis in a way where you say that, we predict that by delivering a better sign-up flow and onboarding experience, new users will use our product more because they'll be able to understand the core value proposition better. And we know this is true if we observe increased retention with the product, right? So you're trying to frame that problem statement by calling out what the users will benefit out of this, and how will that in turn affect some of the experience metrics and the product metrics, right? You could also have another hypothesis. You could create a second hypothesis and say that I'll increase sessions, right? I'll change certain things that happen in a product that help me increase the sessions. So you could say that we'll give users some certain nudges so that they return to the product and perform some key actions. And you could draft it as, we predict that by delivering relevant nudges more, users will return to perform key actions because these nudges will now relate better to their journey and where they are in their journey, right? And we'll know this is true if we observe increased engagement with the product, right? So what would these two hypotheses now turn into if you had to measure these, right? If you had to use some of these metrics that we looked at and put them against these hypotheses. So, I've taken a stab at it, and there is no right or wrong answer here, right? You could imagine this to be in the context of your product or your service, and do a similar task. So you could say that we'll improve sign-up flow, and we'll measure task success with it, right? How many people are able to complete the sign-up flow now? We saw an example of the sign-up flow funnel, right? And can we create something similar? Can we look at how do we reduce the drop-offs at each level and increase the overall conversion? You could say that we'll also improve onboarding, and we'll measure this with the SUA score because we'll do some usability tests once we have some mocks and prototypes, and again look at drop-offs on this, right? So the drop-offs is more like just to make sure that people are not bothered with this onboarding, and they just don't drop off at that level, right? You could also say that we want to increase sessions, and how would you do that? So we would create some personalized actionable nudges, and we'll measure sessions per user, or we'll also measure the overall happiness with the product and look at NPS for this, right? So you could do a similar activity with the kind of goals that you have, map some of these metrics, create hypotheses, and get on to some kinds of experiments. Yeah. I just want to leave you with this statement, right? I find this very interesting. It says most people use statistics or data like a drunk man uses a lamppost, more for support than illumination, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to use data to guide our path, right? We want to develop insights from data and from metrics. It's not for the sake of measurement that you want to get these metrics, right? You want to use them so that then you can say that, hey, I'm here today, I want to go here with this product. How do I do that, right? Now I think throughout this this talk, I think there are certain metrics that I've not covered very specifically. For example, revenue as a metric, right? And I think a lot of product managers would be concerned with that. But I think for designers, it's important to look at some of the more nuanced metrics, just rather than just look at revenue. And the revenue could also get affected by numerous other factors. For example, if you look at the SaaS productivity tool as an example, you could actually have a high churn. You could have the same kind of experience that you're delivering today, and you could continue with that. So you would end up with a declining user base. But if you increase the price of your product, then the revenue goes up, right? It's got nothing to do with the experience. Similarly, I've not covered other kinds of metrics like things which look at performance of a product. A lot of the engineering world focuses on that. For example, crash rates, bugs in a product, stability of the product, etc. And I think product managers, as they are responsible and stakeholder or custodians of the entire product, they need to look at all of these metrics. But I think designers need to focus on some of these and look at how we can improve our experience through that. Yeah, so I think that's about all that I had in this discussion.
Thank you, Gaurav. So we actually have quite a few questions on LinkedIn post, but in the interest of time, I would like to take at least one question, which I found really interesting. This is in the context of B2B. So the question is, how do we measure the UX effectiveness, the design effectiveness in B2B scenario? And if you could throw some light on the enterprise products.
Yeah. So I think, as I said, there are some of these metrics that don't work very well for enterprise products. Things like user base, right, engagement, etc. But there are others that work equally well for B2B and enterprise products. So, for example, if I look at happiness or loyalty, right, all of them hold good for B2B products. You could still conduct a NPS survey with your users, with your end users, right? Not with your with the folks who are making a purchase decision, but with the end users of the product. And even if it's a captive audience, right? Even if a lot of B2B products tend to have captive audiences, even then they'll be willing to tell you whether they like the product or not, right? And you'll be able to establish some kind of baseline. Similarly, with usability metrics, right? They hold true for all kinds of products, irrespective whether it's a consumer-facing product, whether it's a B2B kind of a B2C, B2B, right? Whether it's a desktop product, whether it's an online product. I think usability metrics hold true in all kinds of scenarios. You could also look at detailed funnels in your product, right? Where do you see most people dropping off? And that could inform you on, which areas you need to dig deeper, probably do some usability studies around them, figure out why people are dropping at that, and then take corrective action on that, right? Similarly, I think most of the conversion metrics also hold true here. So I think apart from engagement and like overall user base, you could apply almost everything to B2B products.
Yeah.
And all B2B businesses also have goals, right? So I'm sure you would have, or you would encounter certain kinds of business goals, and then it's up to you on how do you map experience design goals to those.
Mm-hmm. I think there's only one other difference would be that you don't have so much choice as an employee in a company where you're actually given that tool, right? So you're supposed to use it. So maybe the task is the task completion the most important.
Task completion, time for task completion, right? Mm-hmm. All of those become fairly critical with B2B products, including NPS, right? Even if I'm forced a tool, right? I as a user would be willing to give feedback on how do I feel about using that product? Would I recommend it to another company or not?
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you, Murali Gururajan, for that question. It was a nice question. And one more interesting question was, so we have been seeing so many metrics, right? The question is, do you think these goals are interrelated to the product design metrics? So how are these actually interrelated?
I didn't catch what's the, what are related?
The design metrics themselves, are they interrelated?
I think yes. So as I said, there are a lot of these metrics that kind of are related. For example, if you have a high loyalty, if you have a high NPS score, you're likely to see more retention, right? They kind of hint or indicate towards the other kinds of metrics. You would also probably see a high engagement, right? So in a way, they are all at some level interrelated, right? The lesser drop-offs you have, the better conversion you will have. Yeah, so yes, I think many connections can be formed with these metrics.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the answers, and it was a brilliant session. So there is this page that you're saying, there is a feedback poll on how we can actually make these sessions better. So I request you all to take them and help us to make these sessions better and effective. And I would like to thank you, Gaurav, for the brilliant session. I think the audience loved it. It was very engaging. As a special token of appreciation from all of us at Product Leadership Festival 2020, hosted by Institute of Product Leadership, here's a virtual badge for you. The QR code takes you to your own dedicated Hall of Fame page on the Institute's webpage. Once again, I would like to thank you. It was a great session. It was great connecting with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. That was a wonderful session, Gaurav. And thank you, Smita, for hosting Gaurav. Now, let's move on to the next session. So please scan this QR code and send us your testimonial and win rewards. And after a wonderful session by Gaurav on 5 metrics to measure design, we are moving on to Arjun, design as an entrepreneur. So before we go into the session, let me quickly again take you through the open conference day. So this is on the 13th of June, and many aspiring speakers have nominated themselves and some wonderful topics, as you can see here. So the chat window has the URL where you can find this. Please go ahead and vote for your favorite speaker or favorite topic. If the person who you voted for wins, you will get a prize too. So that's interesting. So please go ahead and climb up the leaderboard and get a one-on-one mentoring session with our speakers. To know how, please check out this URL. You can scan the QR code or check out the chat window. You can find the URL there. And we have one winner for every session for the right question or the best question asked. So this session has the winner, Vikram. Vikram, congratulations. You won the prize for the best question for Gaurav's session. We will reach out to you quickly, as quick as possible with your gift. Congratulations again. Now, when we move on to the next session by Arjun, again, this is a dedicated LinkedIn thread for Arjun. So please ask your questions for Arjun here. I repeat, because we still see many questions coming in the chat window, and we will miss out, or we won't be able to take questions from the chat window. So please ask them in the LinkedIn thread, or if there is any issues for you to access the LinkedIn thread, please ask it at least in the Q&A window and not on the chat window. Allow me to welcome Professor Pinkesh Shah, the moderator for the second session. Professor Shah is a senior faculty with Institute of Product Leadership. He's also ex-VP Global with McAfee, and he's one of the great mentors of the product leadership world. Professor Shah, we are very happy to have you with us here. Please take the session over. Handing over to you.
Likewise, Menka, thanks a lot. Super excited to host the next speaker, who is head of design and head of driver experience for a small little company called Uber. It's an exciting opportunity to actually hear from global practitioners. There you go, Arjun. We can see you. And I don't know if that's your normal look or if that's your COVID look, but it looks great. For those who have not seen Arjun's LinkedIn profile, he is an amazing practitioner with a combination of strong strategy, vision, but also hands-on execution. He's got the reputation for designing multiple products. He is responsible for a lot of innovation that has happened in Uber, but even before that, at Salesforce. The way he has designed a lot of that interface is still being used by millions of people, very effectively on all form factors, whether it's mobile, whether it's tablet, whether it's a web, and so on and so forth. He started, in fact, his career as a UX designer in MicroStrategy. So welcome, Arjun. If you can say a quick hello, we can check whether we can hear you as well.
Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Pinkesh. This is my COVID look, which has become my new normal look now.
Excellent. Hey, so I couldn't help but notice that you've worked in Shanghai, in Detroit. Obviously, it looks like you grew up in Mumbai, and you probably did your education there. You also work in Brazil and now in San Francisco with Uber. Here's a quick thought as you kind of get set up to share your title talk on designing as an entrepreneur. But the quick question I have, now that you have that global experience, do you think there is a local context to designing things when your product is truly global?
Absolutely. I think thinking about the local environment, the local culture, the geographical differences, the nuances that come are extremely important. And that's why I oftentimes see the local competitors trump and beat the global players. They just understand the cultural nuances better. So it's extremely important. Simple answer is yes.
Awesome. Well, all yours. So Arjun, feel free to get started.
Cool, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. All right, let me know if you guys see this clearly.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Hi, folks. Thank you, Product Leadership Conference. Thank you, Pinkesh. Thanks, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to speak with you and share some of my stories with you today. I'm going to start with this image. I'm just ponder over this image, what this image means to you for a couple seconds. To me, this is where I want to be. This is my destination. It's my nirvana. I think we all have some kind of an end state where we want our product to be, where we want ourselves to be, where we want our companies to be. And, very often you even see a path to getting there. Unfortunately, life comes in the way. Reality looks very different, right? You're hanging on to like the closest branch, trying to find kind of the next branch, and you're just jumping from one branch to the other. This is essentially what my life was, and kind of is today as well. I have, however, learned some tactical steps of how you can get to that spot. I don't think I've learned everything for sure, but I've learned some steps that I wanted to share with you. Pinkesh spoke a little bit about my journey. I'll give you some more context. I'm currently leading the driver design team at Uber. It's an app millions of drivers use to make a living. Before Uber, as Pinkesh mentioned, I was at Salesforce. But my journey actually started as a computer engineer in India. I didn't know the world of design. I'd even say I was intimidated by it. I wasn't a natural artist. I had studied engineering. I'd even founded a company, raised a few $1 million. So I'd worked as an entrepreneur. And then when I landed a job at the Salesforces and Ubers, I almost had an imposter syndrome. There was a little bit of like a fear of the unknown. I was not sure if I was like up to the task. Over the last 10 years, though, I learned that having a very diverse perspective, I think Pinkesh touched upon this a little bit, having the diverse perspective of working in different geographies, also bringing in your engineering background, bringing in your entrepreneurship background, wearing all the different hats, I realized it actually sets you up as a successful designer. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite designers, he was one of the founders of Jawbone, a Swedish designer. It says, designers are uniquely suited at solving problems on multiple dimensions without losing the sight of the big opportunity to wow the customer. I think the key words here are the multiple dimensions. One of the companies that does this phenomenally well, I'm sure all of you have heard of this company and seen some of their products, is Tesla. Now, Tesla is one of my favorite examples for how they solve the design problem from all the angles, right from what the company stands for, the storytelling, right? The storytelling kind of bleeds into the design. This company is an electric company. The design of their charging station, the simplicity of it, the design of the interior of the car, they even rethought that. They rethink everything from ground up. They didn't want to put so many knobs and controls, the air conditioners to distract an already distracted driver. They just put a simple interface there that kind of changes based on the context of the driving state. They took out everything else. They questioned the norms. Why do things have to be the way they were? They even redesigned the key. They were like, why does it have to be like a clunky thing that I need to get into the car? Why can't it just like slip into my purse or my wallet, just like the rest of my credit cards? They redesigned the entire sales and marketing and pricing and buying strategy. There were no showrooms for Tesla when they started off. I think the phenomenal thing about redesigning sales and pricing was that they have one fixed price. One of the most annoying things about buying a car is you have to worry about negotiating the right price, right? You feel bad if you haven't got the right price. Tesla just kept it simple. It's like, there's one price. Everyone pays that same price. So here's an example of a company that rethought everything. They looked at all the aspects and all the angles of the design. It wasn't just artistic design. It was thinking about engineering. It was thinking about sales. It was thinking about marketing. It was thinking about physical designs. And that's where kind of most of this talk is about. How do you design like a researcher? How do you design like a marketer, storyteller? How do you design like a scientist sometimes? How do you design like an engineer? And how does wearing all those different hats set your product up for success? I'll start off with the research use case. It's very important to put on your research hat right at the starting line. You got to live and breathe the user's problems. You need to realize you're eventually actually fixing a user problem. Here's an example of what we do at Uber. We sit into the driver's car. We take fellow rides with them. And one thing that we learned in some of our research trips, Pinkesh brought up Brazil. I was there for some time. We realized that the drivers are communicating to coordinate the trips a lot. Now that seems like a very simple problem to solve, right? Right now, what they were doing in the past was, we thought Uber was super magical, right? You tap a button, you get a ride, but actually it required a lot of coordination between the rider and driver. They were calling each other, they were texting each other, their phone numbers were being shared, which was not safe as well. And we were like, you know what? The solution kind of is simple. Let's just build a chat interface within the Uber app so that you don't have to like go from one app to the other, get distracted. You don't have to pay the cost of the SMS. You don't have to share your phone number. And I think that's where some of the designers and some of the product people like stop. But what the truth is that the first solution that comes to mind is actually oftentimes the most complex one. And you got to like peel the layers of the onion and constantly ask your users for the feedback to improve further. What we got as feedback is like, you know what, this is still actually very cumbersome. I'm driving, I have to like stop somewhere, I have to type the message and so forth. So we started realizing, okay, there's only X number of things that a driver and rider share in the context of an Uber trip. Why not add canned messages? The ones that you see at the bottom here. You're like, cool, that was an improvement. But then drivers still weren't happy. They were like, oh, you know what? I missed a turn. I didn't know I had to take a right turn. I had to leave my navigation screen while driving and while interacting with the rider. So you were like, okay, cool. That's great feedback. What if you don't have to get out of the context at all? We'll show you your canned messages right there. You can still see your turn. You can still see your navigation. The drivers were still not happy. They were like, you know what? I still have to look at my phone, right? I still have to take my hands off the wheel. And then we introduced text to speech, where we'll read out the message, and voice recognition, where you can respond with just your voice. Now, this is not done yet, right? We still can keep improving, but this is an example of how the first solution, though it's kind of solved a problem, it was still complicated, and we had to constantly work to improve it. I think the lesson here is users live the problem. They are smart. You need to put your research hat and understand what is it that they want, and how do you bring that to them. The next area is designing as a storyteller, designing as a marketer. What does storytelling and marketing teach you about design? You saw a lot of what Tesla did in the previous example. One of my best learnings I had this was at my job at Salesforce. One of the things that our CEO at that point, who I believed was one of the best storytellers, kept reinforcing that more is not equal to better. Salesforce had tons of product. It's super complicated product out there. There's so much that they do. They do sales, service, marketing, analytics. How do you simplify this for the user? One of the smart things the CEO did was every year there was a conference that Salesforce had, which was Dreamforce. And he focused on one theme. Imagine trying to rally the entire company on one theme. One of the years when I was there, the theme was Einstein AI. And you see this Einstein made its way into this infographic as well. It's trying to simplify the problem. It's trying to simplify what the value proposition is. They had Einstein everywhere. They had Einstein in their marketing and their storytelling. There was even an AR version of an Einstein in the keynote speech that the CEO was giving. And then we as designers were learning about how to propagate that simplicity, that one single focus into the product experience as well. How do you use that simplicity in storytelling to simplify your product experience? I think there is this conception out there like more features equals to better. This was a lesson for me that Apple does phenomenally well. When Apple released the iPad, Steve Jobs showed it, and then they got a lot of negative reviews. They're like, oh, this iPad doesn't have a keyboard. This iPad doesn't have XYZ that the notebooks that Google and Microsoft were providing that time had. But Steve Jobs was focusing on 2 or 3 things. As opposed to trying to do everything mediocre, he was doing 2 or 3 things great. And that's the lesson you learn from storytelling and from marketing that you can bring into your design. The next one is designing as a scientist. This is a really interesting one. One thing that I didn't know about that I learned at Uber is, actually, even before I go to this slide, let me ask you a question. What happens when there's a difference of opinion in the design directions that your designers are proposing? Imagine there's a team, there's a room, there's a designer there, engineer there, PM there, there's an executive there, and everyone has like a different opinion of how the product should be designed. Who wins the argument there? Usually the senior most person in the room, right? It's simple. The senior most person in the room wins the argument. What if data won the argument? What if your users won the argument? And I think that's the crux of how do you scientifically, systematically use data to improve your designs. A new learning for me when I joined Uber was everything that we built was rolled out as an experiment. We had a hypothesis of what problem it was solving. We always had a control. The control did not see the new experience. And then we had multiple variations of what that new experience looked like. We let the experiment run for some time, and then only after we saw the results did we roll something out. There were often times, and this is oftentimes heartbreaking, right? Because sometimes designers get too attached to their solution. I may be too attached to solution A. Another member of my team may be too attached to solution B. And for all we know, the control may have won and realize that, you know what, it was not worth spending too much time on this new feature at all. And you fail fast. Experimentation and using data is like a very systematic, methodical, scientific way to design the right products. Another way to use science and data is understanding patterns. One of the things that we learned at Uber is, think of the scenario, I'm sure some of you may have been in it. You want to go from point A to point B. Imagine you want to go to the airport from your home, and you don't want to take an Uber pool. The Uber pool is cheaper, but you don't want to take it because you don't want to stop at multiple stops. You're just nervous it's going to take your time. What we saw in data is there were oftentimes scenarios where there was an Uber pool next to you. And you would be the last person in the pool and the first person out. So you wouldn't really have to stop at all. You would just be getting into a shared car. So it was almost the experience of an Uber X at the price of the Uber pool. The person who's already sitting in the car would get dropped off after you. So you would almost get a straight route to your destination. And we built this feature learning from this data where when you requested an Uber X, we kind of showcased a Uber pool option to you, saying that, hey, you know what, you'll get a non-stop shared ride. And there are oftentimes scenarios where you'll even get there faster because the car is just closer to you. You'll have to pay less. And you're reducing carbon emissions on the road. So it's understanding data, understanding patterns that help you design the right solution. It's not as much about how this UI looks like. It is obviously important, but it's understanding the right context. It's understanding the right scenarios. It's understanding patterns from this data in order to make this possible. I've never worked at Netflix, but I know Netflix takes experimentation at a whole new level. They are testing thousands of variations. And not only that, they're experimenting on everything. They experiment, from what I have heard, even on the cover of what you see, the cover of these styles. If you're a violent person, it looks like they feel I'm a violent person. They have a lot of dark images here. They even experiment and use data to stitch together the trailer for you. You will see a different trailer than another family member, depending on what they think you like. Finally, I'll go to design as an engineer. Sometimes the best designs sprout out from the engineering team, right? It's from engineering thinking. It's from engineering possibilities. Safety has always been a key focus for Uber. And one of the things that we learned from our end, putting our engineering hats on, is that it is possible to detect through signals if your car is taking a detour. And how do we contextually try to help you there? A different scenario from that is it's also possible to detect if there's a crash. And how do we use the right context to showcase you the best experience at that time? I think one of the most important things to take out of a lot of this is everyone's holding one piece of the puzzle. Designer is holding one piece of the puzzle. And only when you think as an engineer, as a marketer, as a storyteller, essentially as an entrepreneur, can you bring all those pieces together? You bring all those jigsaw pieces together and put together a very holistic puzzle. I'll leave with this one last quote I feel that encapsulates this very well from the best designer, arguably the best designer the world has ever seen. Steve Jobs says, design is a funny word. Some people think design means how it looks, but of course, if you dig deeper, it's really how it works. All right, that's my time, guys. Thank you.
Hey, that was fantastic, Arjun, and a very insightful journey into, you kind of Ubered us very seamlessly through a bunch of case studies to kind of make the point. And I couldn't help notice one other comment you made, and I wanted to ask the opening question that I think Raj and Srini also from the audience have asked, similar to that. You said, you went from an engineer to become a designer, and that's a fantastic, transition and a journey. Is there a set of things that you would want to share? Perhaps 3 things that you believe many others who may want to traverse that path and make that transition like you did, that you think could help them based on your experience of having done that.
I'm sorry, Pinkesh, I missed a part of the question. Could you repeat that one more time?
Is there 3 things that you would like to share as a bunch of other engineers like you who may want to transition into becoming a designer, right? And not just engineers, but it could be program managers, project managers, right? What are the insights that you can share that can help them with the lessons learned in your own path?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know if there are 3 per se. I think one of the most important things about why I put this talk together as well is I too had a little bit of that imposter syndrome, like I mentioned. One of the things that I learned after even interviewing hundreds of designers in each of these companies, I learned that the best designers actually have a very interdisciplinary background. We had designers from an anthropology background, we had designers from an architecture background, we had designers obviously from engineering, and I feel that's what actually sets them up for success, because they have the ability to think about all of the different perspectives, their life experiences, and bring that to the table when designing a solution. And it's super important for designers to be that glue. Designers are the ones who are taking in like the demands from the executives or whoever it may be, and then putting pen on paper and visualizing what that looks like. So it's very important for them to be able to understand all of these perspectives around the company. And I would almost say that you are better set up for success if you have a different background.
Interesting. So I'm going to pick a few questions in interest of time. So Hitesh Jain, his question is, how do you conclude or come to the conclusion that there is no need for customer feedback column in your product?
I almost think of this as a trick question. I don't think there. I'll give a very ideological answer first, and then I'll give a practical answer. The ideological answer is that you should never feel that there is no need for more customer feedback. The day you stop learning as a designer, as a product leader, is the day someone else will come in and disrupt you. A practical answer is fair, right? You only have X amount of resources, you have few researchers, and you need to allocate them to the most important things. I think practically the way to think about it is, if you start seeing the law of diminishing returns, right? You can get to like 99% of the solution, let's say in 10 months. To get to the 100% solution, it'll take you another 2 years. And that's where you see the law of diminishing returns. So obviously, I think the previous speaker shared as well, tracking metrics is phenomenally important. And once you see the law of diminishing returns on them is when you realize that.
Is there a slightly different take to the question, perhaps, but is there a way for you to take feedback without taking feedback? Meaning, can you infer things and hence eliminate the need? Have you ever seen or have you encountered that type of opportunity or system in Uber or other places that you've worked, that you think that you already kind of know based on what the user is struggling, doing, not doing, and so you already have the feedback without taking feedback. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, I think you are still taking feedback. You're just taking feedback in different forms. And that could be through data, through funnel analysis of where users are dropping off, what screens are they shutting the app on, what screens are dead ends for them. And that is actually implicit feedback that you are getting from users. It's just not qualitative. Oftentimes you start with that feedback. And then you realize that, hey, there's an anomaly in this one particular area. Now let me go qualitative on that. And then you go deeper into asking users like, hey, you know what, this is what I've seen this group do. Why is it that this is happening? And you get kind of the underneath the data as to like why this is happening and how you can go about it. So overall, I do believe that you're always taking in feedback. It could be quantitative, qualitative, through patterns and so forth. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it was just a curiosity that a lot of people in the community have always asked, that, just like you can do market research without asking the explicit question in the product management space, can you take, design feedback by perhaps telemetry or putting signals or putting analytics to understand what the customer is doing. And that's also a form of feedback without explicitly asking for it. Yeah.
Yep.
Here's another question from Jagrati Bhatia. And I think her question is more around how do you strategize to kind of see how many good number of A/B tests can you possibly do in a limited period of time? So that that you have the best design at the end. Any best practices or insights that you can share on number in terms of the A/B test, or even duration of how long? How long do you know before you know this is good enough in your view?
So this is a really good question. I think it gets to the crux of experimentation is actually very difficult. You need to build a really strong experimentation framework. Now, what I mean by that is the length is not as important as the amount of data points you need. So depending on how many users this experiment is going out to, the length might change. If you are the luxury of like an Uber who does have this large scale, it is significantly easier, or it is significantly faster to get results. So you need to reach statistical significance. And the other complicated thing about experimentation is also you need to make sure the experiment is pure. You need to make sure the control and the two treatments are actually not having any other external factors that interfere with the experiment. Sometimes you might see one group, like it's very tough to run 3 or 4 or maybe 10 multiple experiments together, because a user might behave one way or the other, not just because of your treatment or your experiment. It might be another experiment that's interfering with yours. So the experimentation framework is super important. I'll be very candid. I'm not an expert on creating that experimentation framework. There are phenomenal data scientists out there who do that, and they might be better positioned to answer some of the details here. But yeah, all I'll say is like you have to be careful about experimentation to do it right.
Good point. Good point. I'm getting signals from the host that we are running out of time. But I do want to acknowledge, I think Suruchika had a good question on the whole graphics design, visual design, and sometimes when you don't have those skills, how do you compensate for that? Monica had a good questions around something about Salesforce. Ianu had a good question around Uber for different countries. But if I have to pick one in interest of time, I'm going to pick the last one from Khashoggi Saini, and her question is, how do you divide the time and kind of switch wearing that hat that you talked about between the research, the storyteller, the scientist, and the engineer when you're designing for the product? Any guidance now that you've kind of laid out that framework for the audience? Any guidance on how do you divide the time up, and what percentage, if there is a prescriptive way to tell and answer that?
it is very dependent from product to product, but since the question asks for a prescriptive way, I'll try and do that. If I had to create a generalized framework, though which may not work for all products, I would say if you first wear the research hat, because you're first kind of you're solving a problem, you need to understand what that problem is. You need to understand why users are facing that problem. Then you go with your graphic design hat and you actually come up with a solution that may work. Then you wear your engineering hat to make sure what you are designing can be brought to life, and negotiate and work with that engineering hat on as to like what is the best way to put that out there. And then you wear the scientist hat to see the efficacy of your designs, to understand and be very methodical and less emotional about your designs as to are they really solving the problems, and how do you learn and iterate and get better.
That's a very good point, and it's actually just to kind of wrap up the session as well on that high note. We've seen this as a theme, Arjun, across this whole cross-functional, specialist, right? We use this word a lot. I think a lot of management gurus are saying that, look, that's the way of building your career as well. You may be a designer, but you really need to play these other roles as well, or at least have the acumen for it. You may be a product manager, but you still need to have a design, sense and a data science sense, and so on and so forth, right? You may be an engineer, but you still need to understand enough product management and enough design. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I think we've seen that across the theme. In fact, in order to support that, there has been a separate design festival, data science festival, product festival to kind of bring the same up. So while the poll is up, certainly look forward to the feedback from all of you. I just wanted to, on behalf of the entire volunteers for the festival, thanks a lot, Arjun. Truly appreciate it. Here's a little virtual set of appreciation. Although I do promise we'll take you out for a good Jamba Juice next time. I'm in Cupertino and look forward to meeting you as well. This
Absolutely, looking forward.
Your QR code will take you to your own personal page as you enter the Hall of Fame on the Institute, and truly appreciate your time, your insights, and paying it forward for the community. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Pinkesh and the team.
Bye. Back to you, Menka.
Great. What a brilliant session, Arjun. Thank you. And thank you, Pinkesh, for hosting. So the awards for the day, it's exciting time again. So this session's award goes to Suruchika. Suruchika, congratulations. Thank you for the great question that you asked. You will get our gift as soon as we can send it over to you. And please do send us our testimonials by scanning this QR code, or you can find the URL in the chat window. Now, after Gaurav and after Arjun, we are moving on to the last session of today. Last but most exciting, I guess, by Mary Yang, Director of Product, LinkedIn. So before we go on there, let me quickly take you through the open conference once more. There are many aspiring speakers who are awaiting your votes. So please go ahead to this URL. You can scan it or you can find it in the chat window. Please go ahead and vote for your favorite speaker, and whoever wins, you will also get to win. And leadership board takes you to a one-on-one mentoring session. You know that already, I guess. So please go ahead and check out. And any questions for Mary, please ask on this specific LinkedIn thread, and this will help us take the right question and moderate this session well. Allow me to introduce and welcome Gayatri Murugan, Product Design Consultant with GY3 Design. Gayatri is the moderator for this session. Gayatri, welcome. Very happy to have you with us. Happy that you're hosting Mary, and please take this over.
Thank you, Menaka. Really excited to be part of the initiative. I've been learning a lot over the past 3 days, amazing insights. So without any further delay, let me introduce our speaker, Mary Yang, a seasoned product leader and entrepreneur. She joined LinkedIn as the Director of Product in Jan 2020 to advance the platform's core messaging experience. Prior to LinkedIn, Mary was the Chief Product Officer at Smule, managing the company's product engineering and design teams. Under her leadership, Smule grew into a global platform with over 50 million monthly active users creating and sharing the music they love. Before Smule, Mary co-founded the US incubator of Renren and established the firm's internal product lines. Outside of work, Mary is a speaker and advocate of diversity, entrepreneurship, and lifelong learning. She advises multiple nonprofit organizations and high-growth startups in the consumer tech industry. Thank you for being here with us today, Mary. The floor is all yours. We are very eager to learn from you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all, the hosts and panelists, for the wonderful sessions. And I'm really excited for this panel. And thank you all who are in India that are like staying up really late for my session. And this is early morning time in the Silicon Valley, and I live in Sunnyvale here in the US. I'm really glad to get started here, and please allow me to share my screen. Cool. Can you all see my screen okay? Right, we'll get started. So today I'll be covering the topic on driving innovation and planning through design sprints. So you saw my title, currently that's Director of Product at LinkedIn, and you may wonder, it's like, why does this product leader have to do something to do with design sprints, right? So here's a little bit more details about how I was related to design. And obviously, throughout the many years as a product leader, I had the honor in working with world-class designers in the companies I've been in. And also at Smule, I was also managing the design team for some period of time. And I also reorganized the whole organization into squad-based structures where PMs and designers and engineers have more autonomy and can be driving their own efforts in a faster manner, and allowing all the different departments in aligning early on in driving innovation. And also at LinkedIn right now, after I joined, I also started working with my design partner in driving one of the major vision sprints, the first one for LinkedIn Messenger, in really visualizing and thinking about the future of LinkedIn Messenger. And also at Smule, I was also there and driving some of the major redesigns and also one major vision sprint in rethinking the product and thinking about the future vision. So with that, here's what I'm going to cover today on the left-hand side on the slides. So I'll be quickly going over what is this design sprint and also offer you a step-by-step guide. So because of in the last few panels, you've already seen like some details on user testing and some other areas. So I will try to focus on the things that weren't covered. And also there's a bonus in introducing Vision Sprint, which is a special edition of design sprints that is in a bigger scope and more so used to drive annual planning. And who will benefit from today's session? This session is not only for designers. I also hope other PMs and engineers and all those who would like to drive innovation can learn something from it. And as you learned from the last session and how designers can think like a PM, like a marketer or engineer. So this session, we're going to focus on how you can work together with PMs, designers, and engineers early on to drive your product forward. And for the vision sprint, this is a little bit more advanced. It is really for leaders of business units who can influence the overall product roadmap and the company's strategic planning. So without further ado, we'll first try to cover like design sprints, what, how, and why. So what is a design sprint? A design sprint is generally a 5 to 10-day process to answer key business questions through defining, brainstorming, designing, prototyping, and validation. So slightly different from the usual process that most of the companies are used to, starting from a PRD. This kind of process is usually good for innovating on some open-ended ideas where you don't have a specific solution just yet, and you can gather a group of people together to brainstorm and quickly come up with a couple of solutions that are worth testing out. And on the right-hand side, you can see a pseudo scenario over here. So because for a lot of the vision sprints I've been driving at my past companies, so not all the components have been released just yet. So I cannot use them all as examples. So here I'm using one pseudo example that hopefully you can relate to help you understand the whole process in a more concrete manner. So before the design sprint, like imagine that you're working for an online grocery delivery business and your manager called you this morning and saying that our retention looks really bad. And they ask you like, how can you grow like retention up and to the right? You don't know why, like what caused that. You didn't quite understand the problem. And hopefully after the 5 to 10 days of design sprint, you feel confident, which is the green bubble down here, in that you have validated a design that is usable and also looks promising in solving the biggest member problem that we have now, that hopefully then is going to increase retention from there. So then your next step would be that let's actually develop it and beta it. So why do you want to do a design sprint, right? So again, in a lot of the companies, they call themselves data-driven, they call themselves like product-driven. And when you're doing an annual planning process, obviously you need to think a lot about numbers, about KPIs, about WAU, MAU, retention, and all those. So the design sprint provides a different perspective that takes a member-first approach and understand what are the biggest problems that your users face. And over the longer term, if you can bring in this perspective, I have no doubt that it is going to create long-term value for your customers and then also for your business. The second reason I mentioned is that it brings really a diverse team together, the PMs, designers, engineers, marketers, people in operations, and enables them to together brainstorm and innovate in a fairly short time frame. And the third of all is that this process also incorporates the validation of your design, so you're more confident about the usability of your design before you actually go in and develop it. Here's an overview of the general process of a design sprint. So we obviously want to do some preparation beforehand. And here is the core process of the sprint. So you want to spend the first 1 or 2 days, either half-time or full-time, in understanding the context of the problem, defining the problem that you want to solve. And then you want to spend the bulk of the sprint in brainstorming ideas first, and then designing for solutions. And you also want to quickly validate the solutions with your actual users and iterate on the solutions. With that, you can wrap up and do a quick recap on what are the next steps and also what are your learnings. So talking about design sprints, some of you may already be familiar or have heard of the very famous design sprint book by Google Ventures. This is one of the classic read for design sprints because they define in the early days some of the key processes for a design sprint. I have to mention here in that process that I'm talking about today is a slightly adapted approach. And I believe this is actually more flexible and realistic for most of the consumer tech businesses. Because in the design sprint book, it kind of had to have a full group of engineers, PMs, and designers, like around 6 to 8 people locked together in a room for a full week. Sometimes that is a little bit short for you to actually bring real users to validate your ideas because of scheduling problems. And sometimes your engineers may not have time, like full time, to participate in your design sprint, or that sometimes they don't feel that they can contribute a lot when you're doing the actual design. So the process that I'm going to introduce, I hope is actually more practical for you all. So step 0, like what do you need to prepare before you actually kick off a design sprint? So you want to understand what, you want to have a basic concept of the broader scope of the business problem. And in the online grocery delivery business pseudo case that we're going to use for this session, right? You can simply say that we have an influx of new users who have very poor retention on our site. We'd like to understand why that is the case, and we also want to help improve their purchasing experience. You want to identify the who in that you want to look for the key sprint team members that can help you address this business problem, which we're going to cover in more details in the next slide. And also you want to figure out how. You want to make sure that you send out calendar invites for the sprint team members. You prepare tools for brainstorming, designing, and testing. And also you start scheduling, inviting users to do actual user testing for you. So who in a design sprint team? So generally the full team, maybe 6 to 8 people, but you can live with only 2 to 3 core team members who will be full-time all the time. And your core team mainly is the driver, who usually is a product manager and can be a designer as well. And also you want to have 1 to 2 sprint designers. You can have more if you want to figure out like multiple solutions, but generally 1 to 2 is a good place to start with. And you want to make sure that your main stakeholder, the decision maker, is included in the loop throughout your design sprint, and especially as key checkpoints of that once you finish your design or once you figure out the next steps. You want to have a coordinator who could be the same person as the driver, but sometimes, according to my experience, you may need an extra pair of hands to help you schedule for interviews with the users. which could be a little like draining sometimes. So having a project manager who can, or a design researcher who can help in this process is going to make life a lot easier for the rest of the folks. You want to have experts who can participate and brainstorm, like give you feedback at different times in the sprint. So those could be people, could be your good friends from data, from marketing or user research, basically who really understands what users are thinking, understand their persona, segmentation, can give you feedback from the member perspective. And in the grocery delivery case, right, obviously operations is really important for e-commerce. So you generally would want to bring them in as well to understand what you can do and what the limitations are. And also engineers are also great people to bring into the loop, both because they can give you feedback and also that if they're involved early on in the process, it's easier to get their alignment and help them quickly get kickstart on their development process as well. So then here's a map of who's going to participate in which part of the process. So the sprint prep usually is done by the driver and coordinator together. And everyone is expected to like participate in the understanding and defining of the problem. So that is really important because sometimes some certain design solutions, if you haven't really aligned with your stakeholders early on, then later on you could have a lot of problems in execution. And also if you haven't taken in perspectives from different people, then also it could be that in your development process, you're starting to have problems. And then for the next 3 to 5 days, you will want to involve like your core team and experts in the brainstorming session. And during the actual design, validation, and iteration, this could be simply your core team while keeping everyone else in the loop. And for the recap, it's generally good to either do a live recap or send out a summary to everyone so that everyone understands what your next steps are and also what you have learned from the sprint. And now we're getting to finally step 1, understanding and defining. So first, you want to understand the full context of the problem. So generally, the questions that would be good to answer during this process are, what our member journey looks like? What are the metrics indicating? In this sense, like why is retention dropping? Like, are we having new users that are like coming in, or do we break something so that old user retention are dropping? What are the members and customers are telling us? Do we have any channels for them to give us feedback? Like, how do we understand that? Or can we conduct some member calls if we don't have established channels? What has been done in the past? Do we have similar problems at some point? What are competitors doing? Is there something we can learn from them? And are there some constraints? Like in this case, like, do we have any constraints on the supply chain so that we can't really like backfill the stock for some of the frequently purchased items? And you want to exit the sprint with a how might we question. You want to agree on a problem that you want to solve because you started really from a broader business context and it's not as concrete as a problem to solve for the member just yet. So then here is like the step of understanding the metrics and personas that you're designing for. So you actually pretty quickly figured out what's going on with your retention through partnering up with your analysts, your data scientists. You found that recently actually you had an influx of new members. So basically what happened is that your online grocery delivery business hasn't been a very big deal in your small town just yet, like before COVID. So your first early adopters were those who were like pretty demanding shoppers that don't have time. So they like have their very busy professional career. They don't really have a lot of time to do like shopping. And they're pretty demanding. They're not as price sensitive. They're willing to pay premium for the grocery delivery. But recently, because of the COVID situation, you were starting to see an influx of more casual shoppers who are not so tech savvy, who usually would go to their like local supermarket stores to do grocery purchasing. But now they're coming in because they're a little like afraid of the COVID situation and they're looking for other ways to like stock up their grocery supplies. But the problem they're facing right now, you very easily figure that out through like just calling up a couple of the new members and they're all complaining about one thing. And you also validate it through your data funnel analysis as well. It's like, how come you're always out of stock for what I want to buy, right? Because of the influx of members. So it looks like you're having some supply chain problems that you can't easily fix very immediately. So now we need to figure out what we can do there. So then from there, you start to map out the member journey for Priyanka, right? So this is a simplified process, which kind of skips through the member registration and many other steps, because I just want to show you a skeleton of what the member journey looks like. So Priyanka visits the site and she occasionally does search, but usually she will go to browse the categories that you have, like for vegetables, beans, like meat, and because that is like right below the news section. And why did you have the news section on the top of the page is because for your previous engaging customers, they are mostly looking for like new and interesting like a grocery to buy. They want to try out like pretty good organic brands. So they were browsing that a lot, and that's why you put that on the top of the page. And then you have categories, which is also fairly frequently used, and especially frequently used by Priyanka. So most of the time she will go there, she will select an item, and only 2% of the time she sees something in stock, right? Whereas for the things that are under the new category, like there's a much higher chance for the item to be in stock. So then you basically understand the crux of the issue, and you ended up like concluding this definition of the problem process by saying, okay, how might we help Priyanka, who's a frequent casual buyer, like, and you can have more write-ups about her detailed persona to find relevant grocery to buy so that she can finish her purchasing process. And usually if you have limited number of members in your sprint and you wanted to define the problems to a narrower scope, that is also doable as well. So you can narrow down the problems to something that is like actually smaller than the scope. But for the sake of discussing brainstorming, I'm leaving it at a slightly broader scope. So then finally, with the problem in mind, with the how might we question in mind, you go into the next step of brainstorming and design. So brainstorming generally, I would encourage you to include everyone in it because they can provide different perspectives and may help you come up with pretty creative solutions. And then for the actual design process, again, this can be limited to the PM and designer. But you want to keep the broader team and especially the decision maker in the loop on what you're doing. So for the brainstorming part, generally the process is that you want to ideate, and based on whether your audience are all comfortable with sketching or not, you can decide to do sketching or simply just let them write down all the ideas that they have. But sketching is good, and if your audience doesn't mind, then having them to sketch together with you is generally a good idea. And then you want to present ideas, like categorize them and critique them. And you can either like do the voting together with everyone, or that the driver and the core team and decision makers can together figure out what are the 1 to 2 solutions that you want to focus on. So as for ideating, usually when you're doing it in person, you can write down your ideas on stickers, right? So that makes it pretty easy to categorize by person. And then you can also categorize it by themes, because oftentimes people will come up with similar ideas. So if you categorize them, it's going to be easier for voting. However, this is not easily doable when you're remote, working from home. So you can also try to mimic this process with other online brainstorming tools or simply through Google Spreadsheet. Give each one person a spreadsheet with like rectangular buckets so that they can put in their ideas over there. That is also make it very easy for you to aggregate all the ideas later. And then for the optional step of sketching, one pretty commonly used practice is that you bring forth A4 or letter size paper. You fold it into like 8 buckets. And the first round of sketching, you try to sketch out 8 ideas. And then in the second round, you pick out 1 or 2 of your favorite ideas and you go forward and sketch 1 idea, but develop the storyboard here, meaning the step-by-step process and give it more color to what you have in mind for your idea. So for simplicity's sake, here I'm just using a stickers approach and just writing down the ideas that your partners came up with in solving the like constantly out of stock problem for Priyanka. So in this process, one thing to call out is that you want to generate as many ideas as possible. So don't start criticizing people just yet for like, okay, that's a stupid idea. No idea is a bad idea. You can encourage people to think like very wildly without thinking about the constraints too much, because you will have a critique step where you will be evaluating how practical each solution is and are they like really addressing the top member need. And then from there, you can go into the critiquing process. And for time's sake, I wouldn't go into details of why we picked these ideas, but basically we decided to add a call to action on the item page when it's out of stock to say, notify me when it's back in stock, and also dynamically remove out of stock items from the top categories and backfill with similar items that are in stock. So what if you don't have a machine learning team just yet? So you can always manually categorize the most popular items and simply use a server-based logic. So these are the two ideas that we picked that we decided to further design for. The design process, I guess this is something that everyone else here is like more familiar with. So this is similar to your design approach. You want to start from the user flow first. You want to go with low fidelity, like quickly review with everyone, then go into the high fidelity, and then like plug in reviews here and there. So the thing to emphasize here is that you want to have regular check-ins with a larger team for early alignment and feedback. And oftentimes they will give you like very awesome feedback for you to like quickly iterate on your design. And also you want to make tools that make it easy for you to validate your design later. For instance, if you're considering the situation right now in that you may want to bring in remote testers, then having something that is easy, make it easy for you to do remote testing. For instance, the Figma design solution, and also like having the video conferencing tools in mind that you want to run with, getting those ready would be very beneficial for the next steps. And in this step, what you exit with is testable mocks or prototypes that your testers can actually test with. So from there, you can get into step 3, which is validation and iteration of your design. The participants will be the core team, but all team members are welcome to observe in the member interviews. And I actually strongly encourage you to bring in other team members who are engineers, marketers, or even your decision maker into 1 or 2 member interviews so that they can listen to member feedback firsthand. So it's also going to be easier for you to have later alignment. So why do you need to validate your design, right? So this is a step that like some companies would skip in their design process. And honestly, in like say like smaller bug fixes or smaller optimizations, or when you're developing in an online web environment and you have A/B testing tools, and you just want to test up a couple of different like button actions or like copy changes, then sometimes directly launching it and do A/B testing is going to be faster. But in a lot of other cases, when it's a bigger user problem and you don't really know what the feedback might be, or that you're developing for apps, like especially iOS, right? So the review process is longer. So if you wait for longer, then it's generally like harder for you to like turn it back. So if you can validate your design, then it's going to lower your development cost. And another thing is that we design for our users, not for ourselves. So in some bigger companies, there could be a lot of like design reviews where the stakeholders will have pretty strong opinions of feedback, which is awesome, which means that they're very passionate for your design. But at the same time, we could be like power users of our own products, or we could be not consider the target user segments for our product. So bringing in more member perspective is always valuable in understanding not only the what, but also the why, the user sentiment behind the problems. So for the testing process, the thing I want to introduce here is a concept called high iteration testing. And here kudos to my design partner at Sneal who invented this word. And actually at LinkedIn, we have a similar process that are called Rapid Labs. So either way, so the crux of this kind of user testing process is that while you're bringing in real users and have them test your product, you want to make sure that when you see repeated patterns of people telling you the same thing about usability or discoverability failing, meaning that they cannot find something that you want them to find, they cannot finish a task getting from point A to point B, then you actually can quickly iterate on the design, like in a direction that you think is more promising in like improving the discoverability or usability before you bring in the next group of users. So you don't have to wait to finish 10 user tests to conclude that they don't understand what this icon here called notify me actually means, right? Again, because they're like Priyanka is not so tech savvy. So she's looking at this like page where her favorite beans is here, and she doesn't understand what notify me really means. So then you may want to consider to change the copy or the design to make it more obvious to her that it means that notify me when those beans are back in stock again, so that she can understand how that benefits her. So some tips for remote user testing as we're doing it more and more nowadays. So a couple of things to call out is that you definitely want to think about an NDA. If you're developing something that's like fairly new, you don't want to have some important company information being leaked. And also make sure to send reminders, because people could just simply forget that they had an interview session scheduled with you. Prepare the questions and assumptions beforehand, and inviting broader team members, and have an assigned note taker for each section. There are many resources online now on how to conduct a user interview, and some of the panelists also talked about like similar approaches. So you usually want to start from warm-up questions, letting them telling you who they are, and also starting from simpler tasks so they don't feel like very frustrated during the process. Also ask them to think out loud and don't ask leading questions. Other than bringing real users for testing, there are many other methods to test as different steps of your design process and sometimes even development process. A couple of interesting ideas that I've tried before include digital ads. So if your marketing department are actually acquiring users through Facebook ads, Google ads, or ads on other platforms, then running some digital ads for some pseudo concepts for your company is going to be interesting, as long as it doesn't have any causes any bad impression on your company. So if you think that is acceptable, then it can help you test at scale as to the user intent and also the value proposition. Is that something that the user appreciates? And you can also run more graphic-based surveys. For instance, one tool that I used before was called Pickfu. So it simply allows you to put up a couple of visual mocks and concepts and let users pick A or B. It's very simple, A or B. And if they choose A, they will also tell you why A. So this is extremely helpful when you have new visual concepts to test for. And also survey panels are interesting, and you can even test for app stores. So one fun story to share from me is that one company I was working at, so we were looking to revamp our brand. And the design teams presented very holistic design solutions with 2 different scheme colors, green and purple. And they strongly recommended purple because of their understanding on user persona and all the feedback that they're given. However, the stakeholder in that sense felt that the green color was much better. So, and asked the team to actually continue into this, right? So how do we actually convince the stakeholder? So 2 things that we did. We actually came up with a full set of designs for the key mocks of the concepts under the green color and under the purple color, put them on Pickfu. We also went into App Store to change our app icon into this green color versus the purple color. And very quickly through the App Store test, we found that the conversion rate on the green color simply sucked because members were thinking about this more as something related to finance and something related to safety, but not in the entertainment category that we were in. And also in the graphics survey, we also figured out the same thing, is that they were correlating this with something else. So this is simply a fun story to share with you on how you can creatively use different types of tools to validate your design and also make it easier to convince your stakeholders. So now you finally finish validation and iteration of your test, and you go to the recap step where you always want to include all team members. Either you send a summary to all of them or you do a live recap with all of them. So the things you want to recap on are the final design, testing results, the next steps. And also I'm calling out here, the learnings from this sprint is also really important to share with everyone. Because maybe your first couple of times doing a design sprint, the process didn't run very smooth. People could get frustrated at certain points. So understanding how you can improve the process to make it more adaptable to your own business situations is also going to encourage everyone to continue to support you in the process. With that, we've quickly talked about design sprints. And as a bonus, I want to talk to you about a special edition of design sprints, which is called a vision sprint. So how is a vision sprint different, right? So usually a design sprint looks at one smaller problem to solve, but a vision sprint looks at a longer horizon, usually over 1 year and sometimes up to 20 years, 2 years and sets the design framework and vision, and also generates ideas to solve your key business problems. It can be consisted of multiple smaller design sprints that can be combined together for a holistic prototype. And it's usually driven by product and design leaders together in a business unit before annual planning. So I'm now actually driving and wrapping up one for LinkedIn Messenger. Why do you want to do a vision sprint, right? So generally in annual planning process, most of the companies will do strategic planning and financial planning, which more so comes from a concept of like what is important for our business, what is important for our financial situation, right? But in this case, for the vision sprint, it actually gives you a different perspective from design, from the members, in generating a broad stroke, bold vision to inspire and guide the team. And also sometimes for bigger platforms, you may have a lot of different design teams and business units trying to change the same product at the same time. So the design could get a little cluttered over time. And the vision sprint also allow you to align people on the overall vision and information architecture for your design, so that it's still clean and easy to understand for your audience in the next 1 or 2 years. In the general process over here, the product and design leader need to really work together in identifying the key business problems and user personas. You want to set the themes for the sub-sprints and identify the sprint drivers. For instance, for the Messenger sprint, the themes that I said was that looking at the inbox experience, the conversation experience, the top of the funnel education and awareness, and also the premium messaging experience. You want to make sure to create templates and process docs because for each of the sprint, it's going to be driven by a different set of teams, right? And they may not always be very familiar with the process. So giving them a step-by-step guiding in process and also creating templates for them to fill in what they need to do at each of the steps is going to make it much easier for you to scale this process and have a bigger team work on it together. You want to make sure that you sit in reviews and stay in sync with the team to provide support and feedback, and also make sure that you encourage the team to recap after each mini sprint. And after all the mini sprints are finished, you want to conclude and consolidate the mocks and prototypes into presentable format so that you can share it with other business partners and also feed it into the annual planning process. So that's the last step, of sharing and planning with the broader team. So since recapping is always a good habit to have, so let's have a quick recap on what we learned today. So what we covered are the what, why, and hows for design sprints, and also a special edition of vision sprint. And if I were to hoping you to take away a couple of key important things is that you want to, with a design sprint, you can bring in diverse perspectives from different departments and stakeholders to help you find creative solutions and also form alignment on your solutions early on. And also design sprints help the company really having a member first perspective, which I believe always creates longer term value for the business. And I also encourage you to validate and quickly iterate on your design. And most of the time it's going to save you time and also development cost. So that's all for my presentation today. I'm really thankful for all of you in joining my session and happy to take any questions from here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mary. That was a very insightful session. And the way you explained it with real life examples were really good for us to understand the process. So we have a lot of questions coming in, but I have a quick question before we go on. How do we measure a success of a sprint, a design sprint, that at the end of the sprint, how do I know I have accomplished what I have accomplished? What metrics do we use?
Right. So because this design isn't something that you have actually launched in real life just yet, so I would say the biggest success is that you have aligned the group that are your experts and stakeholders, especially the stakeholder, in that they're supportive of you and going forward and actually testing your design. Because sometimes the solution you come up with could be something very different from what they originally imagined, right? Based on their experience, they could say, why didn't you do this and that? But here, you've involved them early on in the process in defining what the problem to solve. And also you have real user feedback, sometimes quantitative, sometimes qualitative, and share with them what our members are actually saying so that hopefully they have more confidence in your design and be very supportive in funding you to actually develop the solution.
Okay. So one of the key aspect of this running the sprint successfully is also that you define the problem right. Now, when we are defining the problem as a group together and within such a pressure cooker environment, how do we ensure what are the tools, what are the preparation we'll have to do in advance to ensure we have got the problem right?
Right, totally. So that I think is really going back to understanding the context. So generally, if you're able to answer those 6 key questions that I listed out, including what our members telling us, what is metrics telling us, what we have done in the past, and bring in really the right people to help you understand those contexts, then you should be pretty good to go, I would say.
Okay, so we have a question from Harshit. So he says, how do you suggest to address the similar situations in your example as you explained through in any product verticals across the industry involving a time crunch and the pressure situations to come up with something as quick as possible? So I think he's asking for ways to brainstorm ideas and solve problems across different product verticals, given the time pressure involved in these sprints.
Yeah, totally. Again, like this design sprint process I'm talking about looks like a whole process. You have to go from end to end. But actually, in practicality, different businesses have different situations. So you can actually take parts of the design sprint and adapt it for your own need, right? So in this context, I think you're really asking about step 1, which is understanding and defining the problem, right? So therefore, bringing in everyone together from like, those stakeholders and driving the brainstorming and discussion from there is really important. And really, it kind of really also depends on who you're bringing in. Are they like all like PMs and designers from the different business units? Or is that within your own department, like PMs, designers, engineers are having different perspectives on things? So a pretty critical step is like first let everyone be heard, like let them voice out their opinions and what do they think is the crux of the issue and what kind of solution they think there will be. But try to focus on the what first. It's like, what do we think the problem is, right? Then go into the next step, like what the solutions are. So that will generally make this brainstorming session a little bit easier. And you should generally be able to conclude together on like what the align on a problem and the solutions. But occasionally you can't. And in those processes, you would need a decision maker if that really is the case. So that's why it's important to actually bring in a stakeholder who have the authority to actually make the final call while taking in the inputs from the different partners and experts.
Okay. So we have another question from Archana. So most of the resources online that we read or hear about design sprint talk about running the sprints with all the members being in one place. Now that a lot of teams are functioning remotely, is there any special tips and tricks that we have to take into consideration for running remote sprints?
That's an awesome question. And actually, this is one thing that I really try to optimize for the LinkedIn Vision sprint as well, the Messenger Vision sprint, because we're running it in a remote manner. So the first thing I called out over here is that you don't need everyone, like all 6 to 8 people all together, all like synchronously like discussing problems all the time, because that is already getting really challenging in bigger organization, and especially in a work from home situation. So therefore, I called out the core teams you want to have, right? 8 PM and 1 to 2 designers. And the coordinator is really there to help you like drive through the whole process and coordinating and scheduling all those meetings and sending out calendar invites. So the quick tips in a remote situation, the first one is make sure you have very clear guidelines and help everyone understand the things that they will need to do in this particular process. And second, schedule everything beforehand, whether it is for your like brainstorming sessions. And I mentioned that you don't need to do it full time in the 1 to 2 days. You can say that, okay, the first day we want to understand the context or set out a place for people to start in that, okay, here are the things we already know and here are the things we need to research. Like you can do that in 1 hour, right? And then everyone go. The experts say like your data partners will go in and help you like understand the data. And hopefully by the end of the day, then you have everyone taking their results back so you can go back to synchronous again. And also for your user interview sessions, you want to definitely make sure that you schedule for those at least 1 week ahead of time because people have their like own schedule. They can't always be very flexible, right? and also sending out calendar invites for those to make sure that they can actually show up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of us are suffering with the remote situation now and managing our times and meetings.
Right. Oh, yeah. Maybe one last thing to call out is that you don't always have to do everything synchronously. For instance, a review of your design, because your whole team could be very busy. They could be on Zoom meetings all the time right now. Your stakeholder could be extremely busy when they're like in this work from home situation. So you can simply do by either on like Slack or some other real-time communication chat channel, or through emails, right? If your company isn't so used to using real-time chat for work collaboration, in sending out at least like 1 or 2 days a recap of like, okay, here is where we are on design. Here's what we accomplished. Here's what we're doing next steps. And here are the action items for someone else if you actually need help from them.
Okay, great. So I have a follow-up question on one of the things you pointed out about having your users that's going to test your solution in advance. So is there a specific number of users that we should assemble beforehand so that to ensure that result that comes out is valid?
Right, totally. And here I want to add one more thing, right? Is that you can test everyone through like a user test. For instance, you cannot test price sensitivity. Usually you cannot very accurately test user intent. So the purpose of bringing real users for user interviews in this format usually is better for testing usability or discoverability. Basically, can people find the thing you just developed, right? If it's buried, like why do you even bother to develop that whole thing that takes you 6 months, right? And also, like, can people get from point A to point B? So you ask them to like do a search. Can they actually finish that search process? You ask them to finish a purchase. Can they actually get through that process? If you repeatedly see people like getting stuck somewhere, usually 2 to 3 people getting stuck is already strong enough signal in telling you that there's something not usable, and you should probably iterate on your design before actually going into development. And as for ideal size of people to bring in, ideally you have like 6 to 8 people to validate like one major set of design. And usually after like 2 to 3 people, you can already start iterating once you understand the user pain point or where they get stuck very quickly. And in a bigger organization, if you actually have a user research team, what I encourage you to do is to actually set up minimally bi-weekly trains of bringing in users, right? For instance, on Thursdays and Fridays, you always try to bring in 6 to 8 members to like give you feedback. So then it's almost like a release train, right? So anyone who has design ready can go in and test it. And usually for one user interview session, you can test max 2 to 3 major ideas, and don't go beyond that. Otherwise, they would feel pretty exhausted.
Okay. Yeah, so that's really exciting to see that we can get good insights from testing with 6 to 8 users. But if it gives results, it's amazing. Okay, so I have one more question from Saravanan. So one of the things about building a product or when we are ideating is that we have a lot of documentation that builds over time, and we like to document everything that's happening, the decisions that are taken. So what do we do with respect to the design sprints? Is it extensively documented, or we just go through it and say, this is the problem and this is the solution that we came up with?
Right. I would suggest that because this process is kind of a process is more for addressing open-ended questions. So you want to keep documentation like pretty light and simple, basically like very to the point. And generally at the end of the design sprint, you have in mind some sort of like solution, and then you can start formalizing your PRD from there. So if you want to have some sort of documentation throughout the process, then the thing you can try is a product brief, right? Which only captures the highlight of the context of the problem, the general solution, without going into all the details of the features or into like what engineers actually need to do during the process. And afterwards, based on what your engineering discipline is, you still want to put together a PRD. But sometimes in an agile process, we know that we want to start developing once your PRD is 70% ready, right? Because a lot of the details will be added in the development process as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thanks a lot for such insightful inputs and practical examples. So we are stopping it here in the interest of time. And thank you all for the participants who have been with us throughout the session, and please give us your feedback. And here is a virtual certificate of appreciation to you from Institute of Product Leadership and all the participants. Thank you so much for your time. And the QR code will lead to your own Hall of Fame where we can find the recording for the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary, for this fantastic session. Thank you, Gayatri, for your time with us. We hope to see you again, Mary, with us soon. Now, as we are closing for tonight, I take pleasure in announcing Harshit as the winner for this session. Congratulations, Harshit. Your gift will reach you soon. And please do send us our testimonials, scan this QR code and go to the chat window for the URL. And once again, as we are closing day 4, tomorrow's agenda is what you can see on the screen. We have again lined up a great lineup of speakers here. So we have Aman Mehta from Oyo, Bhavishya from MX Player, and Koniko and from Product Maestro. So I hope you all had a great experience with us tonight. I take this opportunity to appreciate and thank the speakers and moderators, and of course you attendees, on behalf of the Institute team. So please join us sharp at 8 p.m. tomorrow, and thank you everyone. Good night.